So, first up, to drive this home, is Michael Litt. I'm going to call him the Hustle King. As every one of you know, is an ass-kicking, get-shit-done hustler. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here today. Michael Litt is the CEO and co-founder of Vidyard, TEDx speaker, and a first-rate hustler in his own right. Michael's going to break down the idea of hustle, and including ways to apply strategically to your business. So get ready. He's going to take it to the next level. Michael Litt. Thank you.
Thanks, dude. Appreciate it. Hey, everybody. I know I'm in Atlantic Canada because as I was hanging out in the stairwell, a mouse came along and was pervertly decapitated by a live trap. So if anybody else hasn't had their wake-up call, there it is. Today I'm going to talk to you about the anatomy of a hustle. And as mentioned, I believe I'm a hustler. And what I wanted to do is give you guys some examples of what that type of mentality looks like as you start your company. I had a deck prepared, and last night I had an opportunity to talk to a couple of attendees at the conference, and ultimately decided that it would be best to do some story time. So it's actually up until 4 o'clock in the morning preparing this deck. But what I want to do is show you guys some of the real examples of what it was like in the early days at Vidyard, how we got the earliest customers, the things we did. And none of this is groundbreaking stuff. And as was just mentioned, you guys all have this in you, but startups need to focus on these concepts. So the first thing I want to start with is the fact that I hate the word hustle. And if you look up the definition of the word hustle in Urban Dictionary, it is anything you need to do to make money, be it selling cars, drugs, your body. If you're making money, you're hustling. This is not the example you want to explore with your customers, obviously. You aren't, in fact, hustling. You're doing business. And hustling is much more than just sales. It isn't confined to sales. It's all the really cool stuff that you started a company for, like hiring, recruiting, sales, obviously, raising money, firing. All these things require strategy and execution. All these things are things that you can personally learn. I'm an introvert by nature. I'm a developer by nature. But when we started the company, I was the worst developer. Therefore, I became the business guy and had to learn all of these skills. There's a ton of people, and I'm sure you know yourself and you've seen them in this room, who are great hustlers and great business people, but can't find a developer to help them launch their product. And in my perspective, if you were a great business person, you would be able to find a developer to start your product. So I'm going to take you through that logic and take you through some of those concepts. Hustling is also a lot of really shitty stuff, like support. I was the first support person in our company. I remember distinctly after demo day at YC being on my knees, scrubbing puke out of the carpet in our house in Los Gatos on a support call with one of our earliest customers, who actually, as of 4 weeks ago, became my wife. That's probably the biggest hustle of all, in my opinion. I also made lunch for the team. When they were developing product, that was the only thing that mattered. And for those of you that don't understand Y Combinator, it's a 3-month program. You're doing everything for that end of program pitch to 400 active investors in the room. If those guys weren't writing code, they were wasting their time. And so I did everything on this side of wiping their asses for them. The other thing you're looking at is cleaning bathrooms, grant applications. If that's a path you want to take, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later on the funding panel, that's your job as the business person in a startup. It's not glorious. Grant applications suck. Do not survive off of grant applications alone. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. And the last thing about hustling and doing business in a startup is calls. Calls. And I'm going to talk about this with some examples, but I was making 100 dials a day for 9 weeks straight. That was one of the only things I did. And I did that to talk to customers and talk to users. And I don't care if you're a consumer startup, if you're an SMB startup, if you're trying to build a company that will scale without interactions with customers, you're a complete idiot and you're going to fail. Even if you're Instagram, you need to talk to your early customers because they're your best advocates and they're your most accurate product managers. The concept of YC is to build something people want. How do you build something people want without actually talking to them? People tell you what they want, and it's up to you as the founder to define what they ultimately need. Last thing I'll say, and I never recommend books. In fact, I think books are largely stupid and a waste of time. You should be calling your customers instead of reading books about calling your customers. I recommend reading this book, though. This was recommended to me by a close friend and advisor. It's the only book I've read since actually starting Vidyard, And this is the story of how Mark Benioff hustled and built Salesforce. Now, for those of you who don't know, he's the founder and CEO of a company with a market cap, near as makes no difference, of $40 billion today. But he convinced the world to store their sensitive customer information in something called the cloud in an era when that didn't exist. SaaS exists because of Mark Benioff. And for those of you who have sold to customers with their security concerns, etc., you know the pain they likely went through, and this book describes how they overcame all of those hurdles in the early days. Read this book. So, the anatomy of Vidyard in the beginning. This was our very first website. I gotta get some water, I'm getting mad pasties, hold on. Cool. This was our very first website. It's an entirely terrible piece of dog poo. I built this myself in 2011. And this was before we launched the product. So it says, hold tight, we're launching very soon. Vidyard is working hard to finalize this new video platform that's going to revolutionize the way you do business. That doesn't mean anything to anyone. Leave us your email below and we'll get you into early access. This is an unbounced page with a live chat widget enabled. So anybody that landed on this page, I could actually preempt a conversation with from my computer. Now, the big problem a lot of startups have in the early days is actually getting traffic to these sites. And so what we did, or what I personally did, is I built a crawler that scanned Twitter bios for anyone that mentioned video in their bio. And Twitter had an API limit of about 150 calls a day, and with that, I could automatically follow up to 1,000 of those people on a daily basis. So I did this for 40 days straight. I followed and unfollowed, near as makes a difference, 40,000 people. But the conversion rate on that was that I would follow someone, they would check me out, not necessarily very likely. The conversion rate on that was about 10%. And then of that 10%, they would go to the website and they would put in their email. For whatever reason, this message captivated them to the point to actually insert their email address. And then I would call those people if they would have a conversation with me, and I would ask them why. Now, this wasn't something that I had any experience doing or any real reason to do, but, well, other than the fact that I wanted to talk to them, it wasn't in my nature to reach out to people. Again, I'm an introvert, but I knew that I needed to have conversations with people that were opting in. If you haven't started talking to people that are showing interest in your product, you're going to fail. You absolutely need to. They're showing interest. Anybody who shows interest in you at a bar you'd talk to, why wouldn't you do it with your website? Same story. Then what we did was we built a crawler that scanned the DMOZ for every single business that had a video embedded on its homepage. And for those of you who don't know, the DMOZ is kind of like a legacy business infrastructure database for companies. We also looked for all the relevant marketing technologies, Marketo, Eloqua, Pardot, HubSpot, Acton. We tried to figure out if they were using Salesforce or not. And then we cross-referenced that with their YouTube channel. And so we could see that there was about 150,000 businesses in the US in the DMOZ alone that were qualified customers. So I spent 6 hours a day following people on Twitter and having those conversations. The other 10 to 12 hours a day, I spent calling out of that list. My hit rate was remarkably low. I got kicked in the shins so many times, but it was fun, and it became a game. To this day, nobody in the business makes 100 calls a day. But what I was able to do was narrow down our target market. Who's our buyer? Where do they work? What do they look like? And put that 150,000 leads in buckets. We went on Odesk. We found someone in the Philippines to help us find the contact information of people at those companies. And those people became our beta customers during YC. Again, I was doing this while everybody else was writing the code. The product had yet to be delivered, but by the time we launched, we had 1,500 people that were actively engaged with. That meant in a 3-month period, I had 1,500 conversations. I don't see any startups doing that anymore. I don't know why. The ones that do certainly succeed, and the ones that do don't talk about doing it openly. But if you're not having these conversations with your customers, you're going to fail. Next, sales lessons. Having these conversations, you learn a thing or two about how to work with customers. What I've done here is taken a conversation from Gmail that I had with Paul Graham, who was the partner, the guy who ran and founded Y Combinator at the time. One of the companies that we found in this list through the DMOZ has been redacted, but you could probably still see it now that I realize that, was investing in video heavily on their site. Now, this company is now worth about $10 billion. It's a YC company. At the time, they were probably short side of $1 billion valuation. PG reached out on my behalf. I utilized my network to get me a meeting with these people to talk about our product. My response, thanks PG, this would be an ideal opportunity to have a talented team at your whim to build a video platform to your exact specification. We'd love to work with you. That was basically saying we are going to develop a platform that works for you. Why? Because we knew that they were representative of our customer base. We already had a roadmap in place that made sense based on what they were doing. That was the response. This individual, whose face also is present apparently, said, thanks PG and nice to meet you, Michael. I know Venetia is already pretty far down the road with some industry standard providers. Let me get back to you on the status. Basically, fuck off. This isn't going to happen. So 1 day passed, no response. And I said, thanks for the follow-up, Joe. Chat soon. You can see 1 day later, hey, Joe, just following up on this after a quick chat with PG tonight at dinner. Like you said, this is an awesome opportunity that we're willing to work our asses off for. I can easily guarantee you a cheaper solution with much better customer service and feature request implementation, blah, 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 blah. 84 clients on the early access. I was 84 of 1,500 at this point, believe it or not. Gearing up for public launch soon. We're going to make her life much easier, blah, 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 blah. That was my response. He then removed PG and everybody else on the thread and said, hi, Michael. The last few months we've been in negotiations with some heavy-duty industry providers and moved ahead with one of them. Everybody's seen this before. Everybody's seen a company make the pussy decision, frankly, and choose an established provider instead of your startup. So I took that as a no and I moved on. I forwarded it to PG as an FYI, and he sent me this simple email that I will never forget. And this is essentially the way the mentality or the theology that our business is built on. Our sales reps believe this. Every single rep has this email pasted in front of their desk because they get no's all the time. But they can convert 5% of those no's into yeses, and that makes it absolutely worth it. So what did I do? I went on Twitter. I found the person we were interacting with. She talked about loving this specific type of cupcake. I asked for a follow-up meeting to understand their purchasing process. I brought her said cupcakes. We sat down for lunch. We may have gone on a date. And ultimately, we provided them a few videos via a partner to get them rolling with the platform. Fast forward 3 months later, they were using the product. The negotiation begins at no. And if I had stopped when I thought to stop, we wouldn't have closed that account. And they were a key account that we leveraged for other customers because they were a well-established and visible brand. The negotiation begins at no. Next. Salesforce invested in our company during YC. It was a seed stage investment, very small, $75,000. We didn't want them because we didn't want a strategic investor in the company. Sometimes that can send signaling issues to other potential acquirers, but we understood that they'd be a good partner, potentially a good product partner down the road, but we didn't have that roadmap vision yet, but they would be an amazing customer. And so I emailed the guy who did the investment, pardon me, and asked him for an intro to the video team. He made an introduction to that team. I went and met said team in the basement of 1 Market Street. For those of you who've been to San Francisco, if you haven't, you need to go, as was mentioned earlier. And we met in a Starbucks. I opened up my laptop and I showed them the product. This is the kind of thing that happens in Silicon Valley. 2 executives from a company at the time that was worth probably $30 billion plus sat down with me to look at my product, which was half-baked. I gave them a demo, and I remember dancing around stuff that was breaking during that demo. And we've all been there before. You learn the dance, you learn what works, what doesn't work, what to load beforehand, etc. They liked the product. At the time, they were using YouTube. So I brought in the co-creator of Epic Mealtime, one of the fastest growing YouTube channels of all time. And he advised them on their YouTube strategy. Got invited to a second meeting. They liked what they saw. And so ultimately, they developed what every big company does when it comes to making a purchase decision, an RFP. And that RFP was built off of the features in the roadmap that I provided them. So what they ultimately did was say, hello world, this is what Vidyard is building. Can anyone else build this? And they got about 17 responses to this RFP. I had invested about 4 months in the relationship at this time and proceeded to invest another 4 months into winning that RFP. And so constant flights to Silicon Valley. I probably spent about $60,000 of my own money after we had run out of seed cash to get out to Silicon Valley and work on closing this deal. This was a sink or swim opportunity for us because the deal was so large, it would have made the company profitable at the time. And Salesforce was one of the biggest B2B brands and most visible brands that we wanted to use our product. RFP process kept going. We got to a finalist stage. We did in-person presentations. They were sending us gifts. It looked like we were going to win. We had pre-celebrated. Another lesson I've learned from PG is never celebrate until the cash is in the bank. A couple weeks later, I get a call from procurement, and ultimately, they've decided to move forward with another vendor. Surprise, surprise. Now, as part of that process, they needed to look at our balance sheet. We didn't have much cash in the bank. In fact, it looked like we were going to be a dying company. We were growing, but off of a very small base, and you'll see how that transcends later. The company that we were competing with had $80 million in the bank. There was no way we could have won that deal. And so ultimately, Salesforce made the safe choice that every employee at a big company makes, and that's to de-risk the decision by choosing the vendor that has the most money in the bank, but probably the shittiest technology. And that's why startups innovate much faster than big companies. That's the key to the city. So I was pissed off, and I reached out to my network, and I was advised by the same gentleman who told me to read that book to go ahead and email Mark. This is what that email looks like. Hi, Mark. We've never met, but I wanted to send you an update. In brackets, Salesforce invested in our round. So, hey, you're an investor. You should listen to this email. Our business is growing well, 30% increase in MRR month over month. That was on a basis of about $1,500 in MRR, so it's pretty easy to grow at 30% month over month. We're trying to win business from Salesforce. We think we have the best solution, but the procurement folks appear to be concerned about our size and financial position. On that note, we have an acquisition offer that we're considering leveraging into our next round. That was maybe not necessarily 100% true. However, that validated the fact that we were raising, in fact we were, and we did have some interest in the A at this point, and that we weren't going to be a company that was a shell or a corpse after they had invested in the technology, which is the big fear. I think we can really help SFDC amp up on social marketing with video. You guys are the best, and we can help you get better. Unfortunately, it looks like we might need your help to get around the bureaucracy. So this was a founder reaching out to a founder. Can you help? I was very nervous about sending this email. Again, I look up to Mark Benioff, probably like no one else in this room. He commercialized SaaS. How could you not? And here I am sending him an email. He responded within 1 minute and said, "Hi, I can't get involved in purchasing. Craig will make sure the right person is helping you." Craig was, at the time, the CMO of the product division. John was the head of corporate development. Graham is the CFO of the company. So what happened from there is that the email started to bleed through the organization. It went from the head of corp dev to the gentleman who did the investment, went to the CMO, and went down a much longer chain to the individual that was choosing our product. And at the very same time, they both emailed me and said, "Why the fuck did you email Benioff about this?" But the company that they chose was consistently failing the security audit. And the company that they chose also was not able to commit to the roadmap that they said they would commit to in the RFP. And so another 6 months passed. And ultimately, because I sent this email, they had validation from the CEO that choosing Vidyard was the right choice. Turns out we were the second in line for this contract. I have since seen the RFP that this other company produced. It was Uyala, and they did not remove any reference to Disney in that RFP because it was a response they used for Disney, and they copied and pasted everything over. And there was Salesforce and Disney interchanged in this RFP, and they still got chosen. There was nothing I could have even done there. But because their product was such a big steamy pile of shit, they did not win the contract, and because I emailed Benioff and got his validation, the deal came back to us. The negotiation begins at no. Now these are two examples. I just want to make sure I'm doing okay for time. Yeah, these are two examples of hundreds, if not thousands, of concurrent conversations I was having at the time. The amount of strategy that went into these conversations is the same amount of strategy that went into every single customer conversation, whether it was a $20 deal or whether it was a $500,000 plus deal. It doesn't matter. In the early days, you do what you need to do, whatever it is, to close these accounts. So the way I always look at this, and the way I look at a hustle, and you've seen this before with respect to raising money, is that there's this magical performance and time graph. That red dot is what anyone who meets you places on this performance time graph the first time they meet you. And this is very true when there's a power dynamic. If you meet an investor who's met 1 million people like you before, this is what's going on in their head. If you meet someone that you want to be a customer who's got 8 million people trying to be vendors, this is what's going on in their head. That red dot is the first meeting. If you get anything done in that first meeting, you're a god amongst men and women. It's very rare that people will do anything in that first interaction. But as you meet them, you build out this curve. And you need to strategically think about how this curve gets plotted throughout these subsequent meetings. Eventually, hopefully, it looks exponential in growth. And that is what I call a hustle. It's that constant iteration of meetings, constant exchanges in personality, constant exchanges of proving that you're performing, so that people get comfortable buying your technology and ultimately investing in your company and your brand. It's true for hiring people. It's true for firing people in the inverse way. You can manage them out. It's true for raising money, obviously. It's true for selling to customers. It's true for supporting customers, sending them t-shirts, making them feel comfortable even though the product is a piece of shit. There's a lot of things you can do and infer from this graph. Again, this is not something that's brand new. A lot of VCs, a lot of people talk about this, but it's something you can apply to every single facet of your company. So, what did we learn ultimately about hustling? I think, first of all, it takes a ton of strategic planning. You can't go in blind. I wouldn't come up on stage without having thought about this presentation. You shouldn't go into a conversation with a customer without any idea of what they potentially buy. Number two, consider the brute force and volume that we employed in the early days. Again, I'm not telling you this stuff to toot my horn. This was terrible, terrible times. And fortunately, I don't have to necessarily do this stuff anymore. Someone else does. But you got to make tons of calls. You have to have tons of conversations. If you're not doing that, what are you doing? I see so many of the business founders sitting on their asses waiting for product to launch. What the fuck are you waiting for? The customers are already there. The conversations are going to take much longer than you have. So keep having those conversations, build the volume, build the momentum. And the last thing is be relentlessly resourceful with your network. Don't forget that leveraging your network is also this. If someone makes an introduction for you, make that introduction work. Prove to them that that was a valuable introduction and they will make more. If you follow these 3 steps, you'll probably succeed in your business. I mean, you have no reason not to. You're building something people want. If people want it, they're going to buy it. And you might just find your life partner when you're cleaning puke off the carpet. So I think I've got a couple minutes. If there's any questions, happy to answer them. Yep.
Great presentation, Michael.
Thank you.
Where are you now with Salesforce?
Another customer.
Okay, elaborate.
The deal we wanted to close, we closed. They're actually one of our largest customers. They're also a big partner in that we've integrated our technology into their stack for Chatter, CRM, etc. The only way to get video inside of Chatter today is to use Vidyard. The only way to get video inside of Salesforce 1 is to use Vidyard. And so in the publisher, there's an icon that says video that's only available with us. It's not an exclusive relationship by any means, but we get recommended by a lot of the sales engineers for companies that are looking for that functionality because they're using it themselves because they're a customer. So the best way to develop a relationship with a strategic partner as an investor and ultimately a channel is to be a vendor. If you can't be a vendor to that company, it's very difficult to build up that channel, in my opinion.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cheers.
If you're looking at establishing something in the video area, what 2 cities in North America would you say you got to be in, like going in there and actively on the ground talking to people?
I mean, the only 2 cities you need to be in is the city you're starting the company in. As long as there's a talent pool to sustain the growth of that company, from an engineering perspective, sales, marketing, whatever you need, you're fine. The other city is San Francisco. Like, if you're a startup and you're not spending time in the Valley, I mean, you have to be there. It's Mecca. Like, everybody talks about the next Silicon Valley, and if you look at the amount of venture capital being invested in companies outside of Silicon Valley and stack them, it's like 50% of the amount of money being invested in companies in Silicon Valley. So next Silicon Valley is going to be Silicon Valley. If you're not out there, I mean, where are you?
You mentioned you got a visibility with the Salesforce. Was there any backup plans that you were going to do something?
Other customers? I mean, as I mentioned, there was like hundreds of those concurrent conversations going on. Obviously, don't put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. You need to have tons of volume of interactions and customers. And what happens with any sales process is that you generate a lead. So it's a funnel, right? So we have a funnel. We generate somewhere in the area of 10 to 15,000 leads a month. It goes down the funnel. We call our revenue engine. Gets qualified based off what they do on the website. Someone talks to them at some point. If that person clearly isn't ready for sale, it goes back to the top of the funnel. And then it goes back down through. And then ultimately, if they want a demo, it goes further down the funnel, and then we close that account. But that funnel is like really wide at the top and really narrow at the bottom. And so you got to have as many conversations in parallel at the top as possible, because that whole procedure I told you about, that's our revenue engine. That's all automated now using Pardot and other technologies. At first, you can't afford those technologies, so it's a very manual process. And my CRM was a spreadsheet. So I think I had like almost 150 concurrent opportunities that looked like they were going to buy. And I might have been overqualifying them. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask if you have a blog with you're documenting all of this as you were going through it.
No, I was too busy. Yeah, this is like the first time I've ever retroactively looked back at the stuff we did in the early days. But happy to have a conversation. You can find me on Clarity. Oh, yeah, it was. I had like this magical space in it, but it's just Michael Litt without the space. That's not a recognized Twitter character. Show of how many entrepreneurs and startups are there here? Okay. Oh, that's pretty sick. And then service providers? I heard you guys had to pay a bit more. Oh yeah, there's my Twitter handle without the space. Anything? Oh, yep.
As a developer, what is the best way to make a business dev person I'm working with motivated?
Fire them. Yeah, man. Yeah, fuck them. Like honestly, we have, yeah. The best way to learn how to hire is to fire, because you learn what you're not looking for in people. But if you got a biz dev co-founder, is he here? No. Okay, that's good. I was at a conference and a guy walked up to me and he was like, "Hey, if I'm a co-founder of a business that's being built in Montreal, but I'm in Silicon Valley and I'm the CTO, like, what would you do with me?" I was like, "I'd fire you." And he's like, "Damn," because it was him. But we've been through that many times before. And he got fired. Oop.
So the flip side of that question, you mentioned making sandwiches and doing everything for your development team and that sort of thing. What else would you say really worked well for you in terms of motivating your own hires and employees?
Motivating employees. Options help. I've almost said I'm a better leader than a manager. I really don't like people problems, but I like talking about the broader vision and making sure everybody's bought in and invested. You're looking for a very specific type of person that maybe isn't, like I think, oh man, I could go on about this for a long time, and I'm going to get sidetracked because I'm tired, but there's a lot of people that try to start companies that shouldn't start companies. They should ultimately go work for companies. Because right now it's very easy to become an entrepreneur, but the reality is it takes something different that most people don't have to actually execute on it. So those are the type of people that you're looking for early on, because you can give them that experience. They can have that, experience of influencing a business, building a culture, growing a company, and they don't have any of the risk associated with it because they can go find another job. You take all that burden on yourself, but I think it's very important to be human and express that burden to everybody, because otherwise you seem like this dictator, and it's hard to motivate people to work with you. Did that answer your question? Yeah?
Maybe even, from the ground level on a day-to-day basis, what some of the things that you think, you said you would say.
Oh, yeah, so we had a 90 days demo day. We had this big 90 days demo day thing on the TV. And every day I just counted down. It was like some other company in the batch made it. And we saw that as like the most important day in our lives. 400 active investors. The only way to get in that room is to make an investment in a company. Don't fuck it up. You got like 2 minutes. And 90 days of work accumulates in this 2-minute presentation. And then we had a 10 days to launch thing. And I would print out a page and hang it up on the wall. It was 10 days. And then every day we went over it, it was like -1. And every day I put a different meme on it. And we actually went like -20 days to launch. But that was pretty motivating as well because people didn't want to see the office covered in these stupid banners that I made. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Michael. Oh, I got it. Yeah, thanks, man.